right, so we're going to start with talking about conditional statements, and this may not go in the order that it looks like it's going to go on here. We're going to try to go in a logical order since we're talking about logic. All right, so first we're going to talk about what a conditional statement is. So we're going to open up that part of the Foldie. So, conditional statement, they can be written in if, hyphen, then form. So you're going to have an if and a then for the two parts of your statement. They can be true or they can be false. So just because you put it in an if-then statement doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. So there's an example of a conditional statement here. It says, if you work hard, then you will like geometry. So the if you will work hard is called the hypothesis, which I always thought was kind of weird because that means totally the opposite of what hypothesis, not opposite, but hypothesis in science is sort of like your educated guess. For logic and conditional statements, it's the if part. And then the second part of the sentence that starts with the then you will like geometry, is called the conclusion. So it's sort of like the beginning and the end of your scientific method, your hypothesis and conclusion. It's just, there's just a sort of a causation. If this happens, then this happens. And then down here, it gives you a conditional statement, has two parts, a hypothesis and a conclusion. So there's some notation that's sometimes used for this so that you can keep track what is what. So this word has the P and the arrow and the Q. It's supposed to be a sort of a flow chart. And it means if P, then Q. Okay? So pretty straightforward. Alrighty. So we're going to go down and look at equivalent statements next. I'm going to jump around a little bit. So if you go down to equivalent statements are two statements that are both true or both false. So if they're equivalent, it means that they mean the same thing in different wording, but they're either both true or both false if we consider them to be conditional. And we're going to look at a lot of different kinds of statements and how we reword these today. A conditional statement and its contrapositive, which we'll look at here in a little bit, are equivalent statements. The converse and inverse of any conditional statement are equivalent statements. So we haven't really talked about what those are yet, but I just want to lay that out there that we want to be looking at why they're true and why they're false as we go through each one. I just thought that this would make more sense to go ahead and talk about this and then go through the statements. Okay? Everybody got the blanks? Yeah. All right, we like fill in the blanks. So let's go up and look at the converse first. So they've given us a statement. This sounds a little bit like geometry. If B is between A and C, then AB plus BC equals AC. What? So we're going to draw a little picture up here of a segment. I'm going to put A on one end, I'm going to put B somewhere in the middle, and C down here. And now so B is between A and C. Point B is between point A and point C. And then saying that the distance from A to B added to the distance from B to C is the distance from A to C. So we can tell if we look at the picture that makes sense. If this was 2 and this was 3, then the whole thing would be 5 is basically what that's saying if you were to put numbers in there. The converse is if you switch the if and then. So we would say if AB plus BC equals AC,
then B is between A and C.
Then B is between A and C. Okay? So you're just switching it. So down here it says it's formed by switching. Some books will say interchanging the hypothesis and conclusion. So instead of if P then Q, it switches and goes if Q then P. So what they've done is they've switched these two. I like to put a little arrow there just so I understand that that's what happened. So we're comparing it to what we had here. We had P then Q. They're saying, oh, we're just going to switch around Q then P. Okay? All right, next I want to go down to negation. Okay, so the opposite of the original statements. They put this little squiggle in front of P. It's not a tilde. We're not in Spanish. This little thing means not P. So it's just a shorthand for writing the opposite. Okay? So an example, oh, I thought this was filled in. It's short though. We could say, it is raining. The opposite, oh, it's down here. I see it now. On my original, it was side by side. Okay, so there's the example. It is raining.
Oh.
So the negation would be, it
It's not raining.
is not raining. And if you had an if-then statement, you would switch both the if part and the then part. If they were both positive, you'd make them negative. If they were negative, you'd make them positive. We'll go through some examples in a little bit, but just to give you an idea that this means not, and not means negation. Okay. Negative means not. Contrapositive. So here's our example. If two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. So I don't know if you guys remember this, but vertical angles are something we studied, like I've done with like the 8th grade. If you have two lines that cross like this, then the vertical angles are the ones that are across from each other. Like this angle and this angle would be considered vertical angles, and they always come out the same. So if this one is 50 degrees, then this one would be 50 degrees. They just come out the same. Okay, so if we're going to write the contrapositive, what we do is we switch the if and then, and we negate everything. So we're going to say, if two angles are not congruent, then they are not vertical angles. And this is a congruent statement to the original. If they're two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. If they're not congruent, then they cannot be vertical angles. All right, so we do a contrapositive. It's formed by switching
And negating.
Good job. The hypothesis and conclusion. So this down here says, if not Q, then not P. So they did switch these, and then they're changing both of them. So if they were both positive, they made them both negative by putting knots in them. And if you had knots on both of them, then you would change them both to not be. Anyway, so that's the contrapositive. Lots and lots of terminology, but these I always think are fun when we get into some of the examples. Okay, so let's go down into the inverse. So the inverse is formed by negating both the hypothesis and conclusion. So I guess I was trying to jump into that with negation. Negation's just one of them. We're going to negate both pieces. So this would say, if not P, then not Q. They didn't switch them, they just put knots on both of them. So our example says, if it is sunny, then it is hot. We'll put, if it is not sunny, then it is not hot, which is not necessarily true. It might be, but it might not be. Okay, so we're going to glue that to the top of one of our pages.